Today, I'm going to rank every Red Dead Redemption 2 character from worst to best. 95% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you like to see more content like this, please subscribe. Getting into it, in last place has to be Alberto Fusar. I just hate him as a character, and I feel like he's one of the most underdeveloped antagonists in the entire game. He's basically an antagonist for the entirety of Chapter 5, or at least all the sections in Guarma. I feel like you don't really get to learn anything about him besides just he's a really, really bad guy, and he's like doing all these things to stop the like indentured servants in Guarma from actually like rising up and rebelling against him, and he uses a lot of violence and all that. And you also, like, when you eventually get to kill him, there's like basically nothing going on. You like get to shoot him out of the cannon with your own cannon, or you just get to snipe him out, and just super boring. So I feel like Fusar definitely has to go into F tier, one of the most underdeveloped antagonists in the entire game. In 120th place, you've got his best buddy, Levi Simon. And again, just with all the Guarma characters, they're just not very satisfying. You don't really get any development from them. They're just seen as these, oh, they're so bad for this reason. They just want money and all of that. And I feel like there's really no development, at least with someone like Cornwall. You kind of understand why he's a bad guy because he's so rich. Like, these guys are just being assholes for no reason. So I think Levi Simon's also pretty bad in that same way. And while he does get killed in a much more satisfying way, like in that actual kind of cutscene thing, I do think he's still a bad character, so he also has to go into F tier. In 119th place, it's Joe. Joe, again, is very underdeveloped as an antagonist. I feel like he and Cleet are just kind of thrown in there to show that Mike has really got the muscles, and Joe's just a bad character in general. He just doesn't really do anything, and at least Cleet you get a little bit of development from, but I still think both of them are just really bad characters, and they're kind of just thrown in there to show that Micah does have a little bit more power on the gang, and, you know, he's kind of just controlling Dutch. So I think Joe also has to go into F tier as well. In 118th place, I've got Cleet. Basically the same thing as Joe. He's just a really boring character. He's kind of thrown in there, but I did put him above Joe just because he has a little bit of development at the end of the game in the actual mission where, in American Venom, where they actually go and find him. But still, I feel like he's a pretty bad character. They kind of just throw him in there to just, show Micah's got firepower, and there's not really anything interesting going on between them and Micah, so he also has to go into F tier. In 117th place, it has to be Colonel Favors. Again, similar to a lot of these other characters, he's just really underdeveloped as an antagonist. He's kind of just straight as like this big bad army guy, but again, he's not really in there that much as the army guy. He's like this racist guy. He does all these bad things to the Native Americans, but like when you actually kill him here in this scene, you don't really remember that you kill him. Like, I did not even realize that this was Colonel Favors until way after the fact. I was like, what's going on with Colonel Favors? I was like, oh shit, this is where he died. I feel like he's just a really, like, there's not much going on with him, and he's not that interesting compared to these other characters. I basically feel like he's just like a Milton, but a little bit worse, or like a Cornwall. I don't know. He's just not a good character, and he definitely also has to go into F tier because there's just no development going on with him as an antagonist. In 116th place, it's Deborah McGinnis. I also just hate her as a character. She's just so, like, stupid as a character because she goes in here, she's like, oh my god, I'm a scientist. You can't be one of the Illuminati trying to stop me from publishing my results. And then you do all these things for her. One of the just stupidest stranger missions. It's not stupid, but it's like, it's just so hard to do. You have to go through all these places. You basically have to look up online how to get all these things. And then when you finally do it all, it turns out that it's not a real dinosaur at all, and it's just, she's just putting random shit everywhere, and the whole time she was just an idiot. So I don't know, I just hate her. There's so much work going into, doing this all for her character, and I just hate it because she's so stupid, and she makes you do all this just to find absolutely nothing. So she also has to go into F tier, my least favorite stranger character, and just my least favorite stranger mission in general. In 115th place, it's Molly O'Shea. I feel like Molly doesn't really get enough development. Like, she does get development when she eventually does die, but there's not really much going on with her, and I just don't think she's that well characterized. She just kind of loves Dutch, and that's kind of her only thing, and I don't know. I just don't really like her as a character, and she doesn't do enough to, like, make me like her, and when there is a little bit of development at the end, it's pretty, like, unlikable as a character. So I think she also has to go into F tier just because there's not that much going on with her, and she's not developed enough as a character. In 114th place, I've got Leon Fuentes. Pretty similar to a lot of these other Guarma people. He's just kind of introduced in here, and he's seen as like the second main guy after Hercule, but he doesn't really do that much there, and I don't know. I feel like he's just really boring, and he kind of gets shoehorned in as the second in command, but there's literally nothing going on with him. You don't really get to learn that much about him besides he's like the on-the-ground guys for Hercule, and like he's actually a Guarma worker. So I don't know. I don't really like him, and I mean, I just kind of threw him in here because he is one of the more main characters in the Gorma arc. I just still don't really like him, though, and I feel like he can't really go any higher than F tier. In 113th place, we got Leopold Strauss. I don't think Strauss is all that interesting of a character. I know a lot of people are like, oh my god, Strauss is so much better because he didn't rat on the gang in the end, but I don't know. I still feel like he's not that interesting. He's just kind of this guy that always cares about money, and while he does take care of the gang, it seems like he's really uninvolved with the gang. And you don't really get that much development from him as a character. He kind of just is this bad guy from beginning to end, and I think that's why he has to go into F tier. There's really just no development with him as a character. In 112th place, we got Obadiah Hinton from that Butcher Creek Stranger mission, and I feel like Obadiah Hinton is in one of the coolest Stranger missions in Butcher Creek. I feel like it's one of the more interesting ones where you like get to learn about the shaman and all that, but this guy is so dumb, and everyone in Butcher Creek just pisses me off so much because they just allow the shaman to get away with absolutely nothing happening to him besides just like they're like, oh, there's still a curse on Butcher Creek, and I'm like, bro, it just pisses me off so much that I had to put this guy super low down here. And while he is kind of an interesting character in his own right, but I don't think he can go any higher just because he pisses me off so much, so he has to go into D tier. In 111th place, we got Algernon Wasp. Again, similar to Obadiah Hinton, I don't think this mission's all that bad. It is super hard to get everything, but I feel like the cutscenes are kind of cool. He just kind of makes me mad because he's such a bitch about a lot of these things. He's like always talking about, oh, I need to go get these women. I need to do all that. I need to go seduce a countess, but it's like he doesn't ever do it, and he's just kind of like a beta about it. He's just a beta, not an alpha, and it just like pisses me off about how like beta he is and just how weird of a guy he is. So in general, I feel like that has to put him down a little bit lower, and I don't know, I just don't really like him as a character that much, so I think he also has to go into D tier. In 110th place, we got Margaret. I think Margaret is such a bad character. She's always lying, or he's always lying about all these things. He's like, oh, we got a tiger, we got a zebra, and then they're not actually tigers and zebras. They're just fake animals painted like that. And then it's like, oh, we also have a lion, and the lion is a real one, and it's actually murdering people, and just kind of crazy in its own right. So I don't know. I think it's really funny how Margaret is a liar of a character, but just pisses me off at the same time. Like, I went through this mission, I was like, oh, it's kind of cool, chasing after all these animals, and then eventually finding the lion that's real, but Margaret pisses me off so much as a character that I think I have to put him in D tier as well. In 109th place, we got Albert Cakes. This is the guy who does the pre-cut houses, pre-cut barns stuff, and he also just pisses me off because he doesn't care about anyone. He just cares about the money he can make from all these pre-cut houses, and he's just like, oh, you're the guy that did this, you're the guy that did that, and it's like he always gets it wrong. He just has way too many customers, and he tries to be friendly with them, and just never works. So I don't know, I just don't really like this guy that much, and I think he's just kind of like a weird guy in general. He just cares about the money, so I think he also has to go into D tier. In 108th place, we've got Duncan Geddes. I feel like there's a little bit too many Geddes kids. I mean, this is the guy that, like, you have to ride around on the horse before him. But I feel like there's just too many Geddes kids to really, like, make a connection with any of them. You have two different ones. Like, one is a little bit older, one's a younger one, and you're kind of more friends with the younger one than the older one. But I feel like they could have just merged them into, like, a character right in the middle who's, like, kind of learning about stuff. He's more like Jack's age, but he's also like helping around the farm and everything. I don't know. I just feel like neither of these characters are all that interesting, and I think that's why Duncan Geddes has to go into D tier. In 107th place, I've got his brother. He also lets the bull out, so I mean, I guess I put him a little bit higher. He's also a little bit more helping around the ranch, but I feel like both of them are just pretty boring, so they can't really go any higher than here, so he also has to go into D tier. In 106th place, I've got Nils from Manzanita Post. I think he's kind of interesting as a character just because he doesn't really speak English at all, but he doesn't really add anything to the entire game. And while he is kind of a funny character for the little bit he appears in the toolbox mission and how he's kind of pretty integral to that one, he's not really anything special besides that, so he also gets to go into D tier. In 105th place, I've got Davy Callender. I mean, again, he doesn't really make a big appearance at all in the game. He basically just dies immediately at the beginning of the game, but it does seem like he's a kind of interesting character, and he's kind of similar to like Micah in terms of his personality. So I don't know, you don't really get any like actual development from him, and I think it is kind of weird that they killed both him and his brother off, but it kind of makes sense in its own way. I don't really know. Again think he has to be a D tier character just because he literally gets no time in the actual game. In 104th place, I've got Tavish Gray. Again, Tavish Gray doesn't have any time in the actual game. I think he's only in this one, which is Horseflesh for Dinner. And I feel like because he is the main guy of the Braithwaite family, and this is all he does in the entire game, I feel like it's just really disappointing that he's not more in the game and he's not doing a lot more stuff. I feel like that'd be a lot more interesting, and he's just kind of not thrown out there compared to like someone like Catherine Braithwaite, where she's kind of always in the game and she's actually like an antagonist. This guy does not seem like an antagonist at all. So again, I think he has to go into D tier. In 104th place, I've got Miss Marjorie. Miss Marjorie just kind of takes advantage of special needs people. So I think she kind of has to go down here. Like, she definitely does provide for both Magnifico and Bertram, but it clearly seems like she's using them as a freak show. And I feel like that's not the greatest thing, a person could do. So I definitely don't think she can go any higher. She is kind of a nice person to Arthur, though. So I don't know. I think she's fine in that way, but she does just kind of take advantage of both Bertram and Magnifico, and I feel like that's not the greatest thing a person could do, so I think she also has to go into D tier. In 102nd place, I've got Jules. Even though Jules does get eaten by the Bull Gator eventually, I feel like I don't really like Jules that much because he kind of just seems like this whiny guy until you actually do see the Bull Gator. And then it's like, okay, you understand why he's doing all this, but it is just kind of weird. I feel like he doesn't really get any development in the mission. I feel like Thomas is pretty cool in the mission, but Jules is kind of like this whiny guy who even is whiny after he gets bitten by the Bull Gator, even though he should be like passing out. He's like, oh, you need to save me, you need to save me. Or it's like, I get, because you could die from that, but like still, he's a little whiny about it. So I think he has to go into D tier. In 101st place, I got Flaco Hernandez. I think Flaco Hernandez is a cool character in his own right. I mean, it seems like he definitely doesn't like want to be protected by all the members of the Del Lobo gang, and he just wants to, fight it off himself. But again, you really get no development from him as a character. I feel like every other person in the noblest of men and a woman like actually have a little bit of development during their part, and he just has absolutely no development during his part. So I think he has to go the last out of all the characters there. So I think, again, he has to go into D tier. In 100th place, I've got Emmett Granger. Emmett Granger, pretty similar to Flaco. He's not really all that interesting. Like, he is kind of a bitch, too. Like, he's just like, oh, you have to do all this, you have to do all that just to actually, get the duel or whatever, or just to learn some stuff. It's like, bro, come on, just chill out a little bit, and then eventually we can do it all there. I don't know. He just kind of seems like not the greatest guy, and he doesn't really like his old days. And I feel like same thing with like Jim Boy Calloway, isn't really the gunslinger it seems like he used to be. I mean, now he's like a pig farmer. He's like shoveling shit all day. He's just an asshole to John or Arthur, whoever does the mission. So I think I also have to put him into D tier. In 99th place, I've got Mrs. Geddes. Mrs. Geddes is an okay character for the one mission she actually appears in. I mean, it does seem like her and Mr. Geddes have their own open relationship where she sleeps with the hands and he sleeps with like prostitutes. But I do think she kind of takes advantage of all the hands because they don't really have any other, person to sleep with, and she just kind of, uses them whenever she can. So I think that's weird in its own way. It just seems like, yeah, she's really taking advantage of them. I mean, it doesn't really seem like that, but she's in the position of power. It's like if they didn't sleep with her, I feel like it'd be a little weird, and she kind of uses her position of power to get them to sleep with her. So I think, again, she has to go into D tier. She just kind of abuses her power to get the hands to all sleep with her. In 98th place, I got the Shaman. The Shaman is just such a weird guy. He seems actually so stupid, like he doesn't realize that the people of Butcher Creek can actually read. I feel like that's something you easily could have tried beforehand where you say, oh, can you read this? Or like you show them a book and then you try to say, oh, can you read the first page of it? Like, I feel like it's not that hard to understand that and to figure that out first before you actually give them the contract, because you just throw in some other language that like steals their land away from them if you just do it a different way. And I feel like this guy is so stupid, but the Butcher Creek people still fall for him, and I think that's why he has to go low here, because he's just such a hateable character. He's such a puny and pathetic character. I think that's why he also has to go into D tier. In 97th place, about Andrew Bell. Andrew Bell is okay. I mean, he's kind of like this mad scientist guy, pretty similar to Marco Dragic. He just is kind of on a whole different wavelength, and he eventually does get electrocuted by his own chair, which is pretty funny. But I don't know. I don't think the Stranger mission is all that interesting, and I just think Andrew Bell as a character isn't really like the nicest to Arthur. Like, it doesn't seem like he actually becomes friends with Arthur. He just kind of uses him to do all these things for him, and there's nothing like really special about it. So I think he also has to go into D tier. He's just not that cool of a Stranger mission character. In 96th place, I got Penelope Braithwaite. I don't think she's all that amazing as a character. I feel like her and Bo's side mission just really gets overshadowed by a lot of the other stuff that happens with the Braithwaites, and I feel like their whole thing is just not that interesting. Like both her and Bo, yeah, just every mission that you do with them just seems very inconsequential. And while you do kind of want to help them get away from like their abusive families, I don't really think it's anything super special when they don't really help you at all. Like it just seems like there's a lot of wasted, storyline here because they could have easily helped you, take down their families or something like that, but they don't at all. And they're not actually using the actual Bray and Braithwaite feud at all. So I think she has to go into D tier. Pretty similar for Bo here at 95th place. I just don't think he's used all that amazingly. And while he's an okay character, like I feel like both of them are okay characters, they're just nothing special and they don't really add to the game enough for me to be really like, oh, they can go way higher than D tier. They're used as like a pretty solidly big character in the game. Like they're definitely both supporting characters in the game, and they're just not used to the full extent that they could or should be used. So I think, again, they have to go into D tier. In 94th place, I've got Karen. Karen is an okay character, and I really like her camaraderie with Sean and all that, and just like how their relationship goes. But of course, when she does, like when Sean eventually does die, she just really falls into the drink, and I feel like her character really just loses herself there when she is like a pretty okay solid character, similar to a lot of the other women at the beginning of the game. She kind of just loses a lot of that characterization when she falls into the drink after Sean's death. So I think that really pushes her down to somewhere in terms of like a D tier character. In 93rd place, I've got Bertram. I feel like everyone either loves or hates Bertram, but it's like people I know, they just like him because he's like a special needs guy, and he is just so weird in that way, where it's like, I don't know, you just want to like him because of that. And he's not that interesting of a character in his own right. Like, of course, he doesn't have any development, and I just think him in the Marjorie like whole mission is just not the most interesting character there. Like Marjorie and Magnifico are even more interesting than he is. He's just kind of like the most boring guy there. He's kind of just used as the main appeal for the freak show. So again, he has to go into D tier. He's really not all that interesting. I feel like he's one of the more overrated characters in the entire game because everyone just gasses him up so much. In 92nd place, I got Reverend Swanson. I think Reverend Swanson really has like the opposite of Karen's arc, where he just kind of sucks at the beginning of the game. He's just this guy that is always drunk, is always high, and then he kind of cleans his act up at the end, but you don't really get enough of that to really put him any higher on the list. Like all the good deeds he does eventually at the end of the game, you can't really see any of those because he does eventually become a pastor and all this, and it's like you can't really see any of his character doing those. You can't really see any of his character like actually becoming a better person. So I think he has to go into D tier, even though he does have a really good character arc. In 91st place, I've got Archibald McGregor. I actually just don't like this guy that much. I feel like he's just Lee Gray's bitch, and he really just is like, oh my god, the Gray family is so good. He just sucks off the Gray family at any opportunity he can. I just don't think that's why I like him at all. I don't know. He's such a weird guy, and I don't know. I don't like this guy at all, and I don't even know why he's up this high. At least you do get some good conversations with him, and he does have a really like good set character where he's just like sucking off the Gray family at all times. He's like, my family served under them for years, and I'll keep serving under them. And it's like, I don't know. Come on, I don't really like this guy, but at the same time, it is really good development as a character because you see how some of these families can really just be, put down, beat into submission. They're like, oh, we're always going to let the Gray family do whatever they want to us just because they're going to help us and provide for us in dark times. So I think that's kind of interesting in its own right, and that's why I think he gets a D tier character as well. In 90th place, I've got Bill Williamson. Bill is definitely not used to the extent that he could be used. Like, I mean, if you see Red Dead Redemption 1, he's like this big bad guy. And then Red Dead Redemption 2, he's just, I don't know. He's not even really using the story. And whenever he is in like a mission with Arthur, they don't really get any good like conversations between them, except at like the end when they rob the thing in Van Horn. And even before that, it's like there's not really much going on between there's not like any friendship going on between John and him, and I feel like he just doesn't have any friends in the entire camp. He's just kind of this loser guy. So I don't know, I feel like they just didn't make him an interesting enough character in Red Dead Redemption 2. They didn't go in depth deep enough, so I think he also has to be a D tier character. In 89th place, I've got Sally Nash. I feel like it is really cool that she's trying to like follow in Margaret's footsteps and all that, and she does kind of acknowledge that all these things aren't really exactly what they are, like the zebra and the tiger. They're not actually, what they're supposed to be, but I don't know. She's not all that interesting of a character, and you don't really get enough development. But it is nice to see that she's like, yeah, trying to follow in Margaret's footsteps, trying to be the next big theater woman thing. And I don't know. I feel like that's pretty cool. So I think she gets to go into C tier. She's a solid C tier character. In 88th place, I've got the Old Cajun. The Old Cajun is kind of cool. I don't know. I kind of like him, but he's only in for this one mission. And I feel like this one mission is just like, oh, you're taking back his home. Like he's not really anything special in the one mission he's in. And it's like a 5-minute mission for the whole thing. So I don't know. You don't really get to see any development, anything like that. So I think he has to go into C tier. He's just really not that special when he's in the game. In 87th place, I've got Elle Hobbs. Elle Hobbs is just a really weird character. She's just way too into the taxidermy craft. She's like, if humans died, I was trying to make their own taxidermy sculptures. I'm like, bro, what is going on with you? She is kind of an eccentric character, and I feel like she's really cool in that, right? But she's just a little bit too much into whatever she's into, like into the whole taxidermy thing. It just kind of throws me off at points, so I don't think she can go any higher than C tier. In 86th place, I've got Magnifico. I feel like Magnifico is the most interesting character of this entire mission. Like, he does have his own thing. He's like, oh, I'm trying to go off on my own because Margaret's kind of, like, just taking all our money and everything, and I don't really want to live with her anymore. And he kind of finds his own family when he comes back because they are kind of a family. Like, Margaret definitely takes care of them well, but at the same time, she is just basically profiting off of a whole freak show, which is a little weird in its own right. But, I don't know. I feel like Magnifico is one of the more interesting characters, even though this part of the mission is so annoying. I actually hate Magnifico in this part of the mission. So, I don't know. Even though this part's really annoying, I feel like he's the most interesting character in this entire mission. So, I guess he gets to go into C tier. In 85th place, I've got Billy Midnight. Billy Midnight is kind of one of the cooler characters in The Noblest of Men and a Woman, just because he does, like, he's like, oh my god, you're one of the Illuminati people. They're coming after me. And he just runs onto the thing. And then, like, if you do shoot him, like, he'll actually shoot himself here. So, I don't know. He doesn't really seem like he wants to live. He's just kind of this drunk guy. And I don't know. I think there's a nice amount of character development in that short amount of time he's in the game. But he's not that interesting to get anything higher than C tier. But, I mean, while he's in there, he's a pretty solid character. So, C tier is a perfect spot for him. In 84th place, I've got Tom Dickens. Tom Dickens is low-key a little bit of an asshole. At the beginning of the time when he's with John, he's like, oh, you're a gunslinger before. You have all these multiple names. But then he kind of warms up to John. And I feel like they're kind of a lot nicer at the end of the game. So, I don't know. I feel like Dickens is okay. He's definitely nothing special, and he's definitely one of the more annoying people on Getty's Ranch. But the fact that he actually is nice to John, Jim, Milton, by the end of his time there, I feel like, you know, he definitely does get to go up a little bit. So, I think C tier is a perfect spot for him. In 83rd place, about Andreas. He's the German guy with the German family, the German settlers, and I feel like he's kind of cool. Like, especially when he's riding back with Arthur, you know, to drop off his family or to drop him off to his family. I think they do have some good banter, just because one of them is speaking in German and one of them speaking in English, and then eventually they do take care of Arthur. So I think that's a really nice, you know, call back to the beginning of the game. It's like this is the first family that helped him out, and this is the last family that's going to help him out. It's like the first family, and then they're the last family, which is really, really crazy in its own right. And I feel like it's a nice, you know, circle of life with Arthur. So I think they have to go into C tier. Andreas is definitely the most interesting member of the entire family. Like, no one else really has that many lines or that much interesting stuff to go through, but I don't know. I feel like he's the most interesting character out of the entire family, and I think that's why he has to go into C tier. In 82nd place, I've got Lee Gray. Lee Gray is, I don't know, an okay antagonist here. I feel like just the Gray family in general is just very underwhelming for me. They don't really do as much as the Braithwaite family does. I feel like basically any mission that involves them, except for the burning of the tobacco fields, but like they're not the specific one. They're the ones you're taking it out there. But I don't know. I feel like just the whole family is kind of bad, and like him being a sheriff is kind of cool, and like kind of being a corrupt sheriff, like doing, of course, favoring the Grays there is also interesting in its own right, but I don't know. I feel like just this whole family is not all that interesting. So I think Lee Gray gets to go into C tier as well. In 81st place, I've got Desmond Blythe. Desmond Blythe actually is a pretty cool character for like the very short time he's there. He's like, oh my god, I'm this rich guy. He thinks he's the shit, and then he eventually gets. The funny thing is just like he gets such a good hand, and Arthur also gets such a good hand, and he's like, oh, you cheated, and it's like, wow. I mean, I guess like clearly Arthur did cheat, but at the same time, it's just such a funny thing, and I feel like Desmond Blythe he thinks he's this rich big guy. He thinks he can do all this stuff, and you know you can't really do all that. So I don't know. Desmond Blythe is pretty cool. I just think it's really funny that he thinks he's the shit, and he always wants to make more and more money. He's like, oh, of course I'm a high roller, I'm all this, and it's like, I don't know, I like him as a character, but he's just like such an arrogant guy, so he has to go into C tier. In 80th place, I've got Seamus. Seamus is a really funny guy for the few mentioned, but he's just such a bitch to like Arthur and John, I guess. I mean, I guess he's not as much of a bitch to John, but like he's just so standoffish at points, and he's just like also like such a beta at points. He's like, oh, I don't want to upset the guy in Emerald Ranch. I don't know. I just think he's a funny guy, and he always just tries to scam you. Like all the fence guys, they always try and scam you, but Seamus just like so mean about it at the same time. So I think he has to go into C tier. He's okay, but he's definitely nothing special. In 79th place, you got the Davies brothers. Basically the same thing for them. Like they're okay, but they always kind of try and scam you. They're just like fence owners, but I guess they're more for the horse fence. But it's like you go there and you try and do all this stuff, and you're like, oh my god, I got these insane racehorses, and they're like, I got $500 for these racehorses that are supposed to cost $5,000. It's like, okay, a little interesting, but I don't know. They're okay. They're definitely more interesting in a way than Seamus. Like I feel like him and his like deaf brother are a little bit cooler, like Clive and his deaf brother, Clay and his deaf brother. I don't know which one is which, but either way, they're a little bit more interesting than like Seamus is, but they're definitely nothing special, so they also have to go into C tier. In 78th place, I got Mr. Devon from Mr. Devon and Mr. Wayne. And I feel like Mr. Devon is, I don't know, he's okay. Like, he definitely knows how to hold his own with the guns and everything, unlike Mr. Wayne. But I feel like, again, you don't really get anything interesting because he's talking to Charles the entire time. And, I mean, while he is a pretty nice guy, it doesn't seem like there's, like, anything special going on with him. So I feel like he kind of has to go into C tier. In 77th place, I got Theodore Levin. Theodore Levin is, I don't know, he's okay as a dude. Like, I don't think he's all that interesting, but the fact that he kind of puts up with Jim Boy Calloway the entire time, when Jim Boy Calloway is just kind of a dick the entire time, I feel like that has to put him a little higher than, I normally put him, but he's still not that interesting of a character. He's just kind of this book writer that's always trying to make a buck, and, he wants to set it up as Jim Boy Calloway was this amazing, insane gunslinger when he really wasn't. So, I don't know. I think he just has to go into C tier. He's really nothing special as a character, but he's a little bit cooler than some of these other people. In 76th place, we got Meredith Buckley. I feel like Meredith is okay. Like, I don't know. I kind of like her when you get to go home, and she's like, oh my god, I was so scared. I'm sorry I got that other guy murdered and all that. But, again, you don't really get that much development, but you do eventually get to take her home to her parents, which I feel like that's pretty cool to do. But I don't know. There's nothing really special with her going on, and I think that's why she kind of has to go into C tier. Just not that amazing of a character. In 75th place, we got Archie Downs. I kind of like Archie at points because he's just like standoffish, and he's like, hey, you could not say that about my dad. You're trying to take my dad's spot and all that. But again, Archie just really doesn't have that much development. I mean, he does have some nice development, turning from like this, I don't know, standoffish guy to eventually like working for his mom. He's pretty honorable in that way, but he doesn't really have that much development besides like, being nice to Arthur at the end of the game just because Arthur gives him money. So I think he also has to go into C tier. There's just not really enough going on with him compared to someone like Edith or even his dad at points. In 74th place, I've got Abe from Pronghorn Ranch. I feel like Abe is pretty cool. He's definitely a lot better than like Mr. Dickens. I feel like he's just like a lot more of a chiller than someone else. Like, he knows that John isn't really telling the truth about everything, but he's kind of just chill about it, and he doesn't like press him about anything. I feel like that's why Abe has to be a lot better than like anyone else on the farm, because he doesn't really care as long as John gets the work done and like Mr. Geddes is fine with it. So I think Abe is like, he's a cool character. He definitely doesn't do anything special. So I think he perfectly has to go into C tier, but he still is a cool character nonetheless. In 73rd place, I've got Dr. Alphonse Renaud. He's the guy from No Good Deed. I feel like he's a pretty cool character. He definitely is, in a weird place, like in Rhodes. I feel like black people aren't really the most welcome there. And I don't know, he's just kind of a chiller, especially after Arthur gets tuberculosis. He like gives Arthur something. He's like, I know this isn't going to like fully fix your thing, but still, here you go. I got you with it. And it's like, I don't know. He seems like a cool guy. He's definitely nothing special. And I feel like this Stranger mission is just kind of a fetch mission, but I don't know. It still is a pretty solid one. And I definitely like this guy's character. So he has to go into C tier. In 72nd place, I got Henry Lemieux. I feel like he's a pretty solid mayor. Like, he kind of does what needs to be done for Saint Denis. And I don't know, he just gets shit done. But I think between him and Jean-Marc, like, they're both very similar, and it's more like one guy kind of gets stuff done and one guy doesn't get stuff done, but he just wants it to be like all done the right way. And I don't know, I definitely like Henry, but I just don't think it's like I don't think he's anything special as a character, and I feel like he's just okay as is. So I don't know. I can't really put him any higher than C tier, but he definitely is a solid character. In 71st place, I've got John Mark, basically the opposite to Henry Lemieux, and I feel like John Mark is, he's a much nicer guy. He, like, always wants the right thing to be done. He doesn't want to do anything the bad way, but clearly, like, nothing would get done in Saint Denis, especially when you have, like, Guido Martelli or Bronte, like, entirely controlling the town. So, I don't know. He's a cool guy. He's just really nothing special to me. So, I don't know. Again, it's pretty similar to Lemieux, where it's like these guys are just politics guys, and they don't really fit the entire Red Dead Redemption 2 story, like in terms of Western-wise and the themes like that. But he's still a cool guy, so I think he goes into C tier as well. In 70th place, I got Ercole, and I feel like Ercole is a pretty solid character. I don't know. He's pretty cool. He just kind of helps the gang out when they're on Guarma, and he's like a really nice guy. He's literally risking his own life to like save the people on Guarma, even though he's from Haiti, but there's not really a lot of character development going on with him, and he's not that interesting of a character. He's just like this freedom fighter, similar to, some of the other people in real life, and I don't know. Nothing special, but definitely a C-tier character to me. In 69th place, I got Anthony Foreman. I feel like Anthony Foreman actually is a pretty solid character, especially in the epilogue, like, especially in the beginning of the game. He's just, like, beating women and, like, doing a lot of stuff to Tilly that's, like, really bad. But it seems like he's kind of reformed himself during the epilogue with John, where you can actually like capture him and he's a bounty. And I mean, of course he's like still involved in bad stuff, but it seems like he's toned down a lot of the stuff he was doing earlier in the game because he doesn't really have a gang to run with. So I don't know. I definitely like him as a character, and there is a lot of interesting backstory going on, especially if you let him live to the epilogue, but there's nothing super special, so he has to go into C tier as well. In 68th place, I got Helen from the whole brothers thing. I don't know. Helen's interesting. Like, she definitely wants the boys to stop fighting over her. But at the same time, of course, she does love the attention. And I feel like that's really where the dichotomy comes here. Like, both the boys want to, get Helen and, like, show off to Helen. But at the same time, like, Helen is the only one that's craving their attention. That's kind of, like, what sets them off at the end and kind of gets them to let go of her. So, I don't know. She's a C-tier character. She's kind of this attention person. She's always seeking attention, and she's not really that special besides it. She kind of like wants them to stop, but at the same time she doesn't, so she goes into C tier. In 67th place, I got Protus. I feel like Protus is the less outgoing of the two brothers, and I feel like Acrisius is really like the main guy, but I don't know, they're both pretty similar in their own ways, and they both just want to show off to Helen and want to do all these daring stunts to do that, and eventually, they do make up. So I don't know, I feel like they're both basically the same, and they're both C tier. In 66th place, I got Acrisius. Pretty much the same as Protus. I just feel like he's a little bit more outgoing and a little bit more like pushing everything forward. So I put him a little bit above Protus, but they're both very, very similar characters. Both have to go in C tier, and they both eventually make up, which is, a nice thing. Brothers over the women forever. Always do that. And, I think he goes into C tier, but yeah, brothers over the women forever, especially when you're like twins like these guys. Just pick the brothers over the women. So these guys get to both go in C tier. In 65th place, I've got Olive Calhoun. I feel like she's a really solid character in terms of like wanting to get women to vote, and she's kind of just like this badass woman. And eventually, if you do read in, I think, the newspapers, you get to see that she eventually does die from doing one of these things. So I say, sticking up for what's right, I respect that for sure. But she doesn't really get that much time, and I feel like I can't put her any higher than C tier because of that. And I think just this mission in general is pretty boring, even though she is a really interesting character and kind of like very, very badass in her own right. So I don't know. I can't put her any higher than C tier, but she's definitely a very, very cool character nonetheless. In 64th place, I've got Jamie Gillis. I feel like Jamie is also a pretty solid character. I definitely like him, and he's very, very nice to Arthur, even if he doesn't really have to be. So, I don't know. I definitely like him as a character. You also can see that he does love his family and all that, but he kind of just wants to do his own thing, and that's why he eventually does join the cult. So, I don't know, there's some pretty solid character development even in the short mission that he's a part of, and just because he has a good relationship with Arthur, and it seems like all of his family really cares about him. I feel like he has to go in C tier, even if he doesn't really play a large role in the entire game. In 63rd place, I've got Joseph R. Barnes, aka the Saint Denis doctor who helps out Arthur when he actually does get diagnosed with tuberculosis. And while he doesn't play a big role in the game at all, I feel like, the fact that he kind of tells it how it is to Arthur, and he's like, yo, you're going to die probably if you don't get to like California and somewhere dry. And like, you're going to die really soon probably if you don't get to California somewhere soon. So I don't know. I definitely like him as a character. He definitely does not have that much actual like game time, but he is a very solid character. And, you know, for the little time he's in the game, I feel like he really, really works well. So he gets to also go into C tier. In 62nd place, I've got David Geddes. I feel like David Geddes is a pretty cool character. Like, he's just a really nice guy, but at the same time, he's definitely doing some weird stuff with, like, prostitutes and all that. And he's doing some interesting stuff in terms of his family. But I don't know, he's still a nice guy nonetheless. I just feel like he doesn't really have that much character development besides just being the super, super nice guy that helps out John, even though he knows John's, you know, basically lying about everything he says to him. So he definitely goes into C tier. Not much character development, but still a solid guy. In 61st place, I've got Peita. Peita really has no character development. I swear this guy says like 2 lines in the entire game, even though he's involved in like a lot of different missions. But I don't know. He's still pretty cool as is. And just like him being really good friends with Eagle Flies and him just being a pretty nice guy that wants to help Eagle Flies and wants to help everyone else in the Native American Reserve has to make me put him up to C tier, even though he is kind of just like, you know, following in Eagle Fly's footsteps. He still is a pretty cool guy nonetheless and has to go into C tier. In 60th place, I've got Mr. Gillis. I don't really like this guy that much, but I feel like there is a very, very solid like description of who he is as a character, and it shows that this guy's never going to get any better than he tries to be at all. Like, he's never going to get better for Mary. He's never going to get better for Jamie. Just like this abusive father, he's going to be forever. And I feel like it really has a nice parallel to like Arthur's story where his father kind of abused him, and he always wanted his father to die. And he wants kind of the same thing with Mary because, you know, Mr. Gillis never accepted him as like a husband to Mary. So I don't know, he has to go into C tier, but there is some really, really solid character development even in the short time he's in the game. In 59th place, I've got Agent Ross. I feel like Agent Ross, you know, isn't really solidly developed in this game, but you can see like the bits and little things that Milton does that really influence Agent Ross in the second game and in Red Dead Redemption 1, where you can see just like everything that they kind of tied back to it, which I think is just amazing. You see how like he develops as a character and how he becomes a similar guy to like Agent Milton and just doing all this super, super bad stuff and like just doing illegal stuff to, you know, take advantage of people and get what the government wants to get done. So I don't know, Agent Ross is a really interesting character and you can really see that development, but just because he doesn't play a big role, he has to go in C tier as well. In 58th place, we got Brother Dorkins, one of the most honorable characters in the entire game. But again, he doesn't really play a big role to like help Arthur or anything. And I just don't think he's that interesting of a character while he's in there. He just plays a super straight guy that's like the nicest guy ever. He's just a super honorable character, but there's not really much development going on. So I think he also has to go into C tier as well because there's just not much going on with him. In 57th place, I've got Tilly. I feel like Tilly is a really solid character, but there's not enough going on with her. Like, I feel like she's just not developed enough as a character to really see that much and, like, to put her any higher because she's just not involved in a lot of missions. And while she does save Jack at the end, there's not a lot of other missions she's really involved in, or at least like being a main character. And like the one she's like really involved in, you just have to save her. It doesn't really do much besides like take her revenge out on Anthony Foreman. So I can't really put her any higher than C tier, but she is a solid character while she's actually in the game. In 56th place, I've got Miss Grimshaw. I actually do like Miss Grimshaw, but she does do a little like kind of abusive things to like Tilly, Mary Beth, and Karen. And she is like a little weird with them, but to everyone else, I feel like she's pretty solid. And she is like a nice person around camp, and she kind of, you know, clears everything up for everyone around camp. So she's solid in that perspective, but I feel like people a little bit overrate her just because she did side with Arthur at the end of the game before getting shot by Micah. But she still is a really solid character no matter what. But I think I can only put her in C tier just because she's not in the game that much. In 55th place, about Jimmy Brooks. I feel like Jimmy Brooks is a pretty solid character for the very, very short time he's in the game. Also, the fact that he kind of correlates with the Strange Man. And it seems like there's a lot more going on to him than, you know, exactly just what they put in the mission. I feel like that has to put him up a little bit higher, but there's not that much going on with him in this one part of the mission. And I don't know, you can't put him any higher because of this, but he definitely is still a very, very interesting character and has to go in C tier to me just because he does have these interesting connections with the Strange Man and just kind of sets off the honor system in general. In 54th place, about Pearson. I feel like Pearson is a really nice guy. I mean, he does have a little bit of a grudge towards Sadie, and he kind of wants her to do everything because she's like a woman and works in camp. But I do think that he is a pretty solid character. I feel like he's just a really nice guy. He does just like a lot of, I don't know, fun stuff around camp in terms of like not being like the main guy. He's also just kind of takes care of everyone, even if he doesn't really have to, and kind of gets shit on for it. So I don't know. I like Pearson as a character. He just doesn't do enough to put him any higher than C tier in my opinion. In 53rd place, I've got Kieran Duffy. I feel like Kieran is a really solid character for the short time he's in the game, but you don't really get enough like development with him as a character. He comes in during the second chapter, or like I guess the first chapter in a point, and then he gets cut out by the fourth chapter, but he's also just not really involved in anything that much to put him any higher than here. And I don't know, he's a nice character. You do have some nice bonding moments with him and Arthur, but there's nothing like really special about him as a character to justify him going any higher than C tier, so I have to put him in C tier. In 52nd place, I've got Javier Escuela. I definitely like Javier as a character, but I feel like so many people overrate him just because he is like an interesting character, but he's just not utilized well enough in Red Dead Redemption 2, especially when he is like one of the bigger bad guys in Red Dead Redemption 1, and he's still underutilized there. I just think he's underutilized totally as a character. And I feel like when he's in a mission, he's not normally like your best friend about it. Like he's not like really good friends with Arthur or really good friends with John. It's just kind of he's there, just similar to Bill. He's just very underutilized in the game, so I can't really put him any higher than C tier as well. In 51st place, I've got Jack Marston. I really like Jack as a character, especially when he's a little kid. When he does grow up, he does get a little bit more annoying. And I don't know, I feel like people definitely like him a lot more than he like really needs to be liked, but he definitely is still a solid character, and he's just like really funny, especially when he's a little kid, just because he's so oblivious to everything that's going on with the gang. And just like, I don't know, I like him as a character. He's just really, really nothing special. I mean, he's a little kid. He can't really do that much. So he also has to go into C tier. In 50th place, we got Mary Lynn. I feel like Mary is a very, very underrated character. I feel like a lot of people hate on her for kind of no reason, just because she and Arthur really couldn't be together. But I still like her as a character, and I feel like she kind of has her own best interests in mind while also kind of having Arthur's best interests. Like, Arthur really shouldn't rope her in to, like, you know, being a part of the gang, and she doesn't really want to, like, take Arthur away from the gang when he kind of has stuff to, like, do there. So I can't put her any higher than C tier just because she's not really involved in the game that much, and I feel like her like mission with Arthur is just kind of a whole side mission from the regular game, but she still is a pretty cool character, and I definitely still like her as a character. She's just nothing special, so I can't put her any higher than C tier. In 49th place, I've got Ansel Atherton. I love Ansel as a character just because he is just so straight up with John when he's talking to him. He's like, yo, the bank's going to own you. Beecher's Hope is a terrible piece of land. And John's like, bro, I'm just doing it for my wife. And Ansel's just straight up with him. He's like, yeah, it's probably a terrible piece of land. You're probably going to lose money on it. And the bank's going to own you. But if you want to do it, you can. And he kind of always tries to do the best thing for John, even if he knows it's not really the best thing for John to do at the time. So he's definitely a really cool character, and I feel like just the time he's in it, he's a pretty solid guy. So I think he gets to go into B tier. In 48th place, about William. I actually really like William as a character. I mean, he just kind of shows up around the map at random times, which I feel like is really cool, but he's not really that interesting as a stranger character. I just think the fact that he actually like shows up around the game even after you finish his mission has to put him a little bit higher than some of these other stranger characters. So I think he gets to go into B tier. He's also just kind of a chiller the whole time, so he has to go into B tier. In 47th place, I've got Phineas T. Ramsbottom. I think Phineas is also just a pretty cool guy, like especially during this scene here, the only scene that you actually get to talk to him. He's just really cool, and also the fact that this guy is smoking like 20 packs a day or something just to get cards. It's such a W move by him. He's just such a funny guy in general, and I mean, while he's really dedicated to the craft, he's doing the lung cancer speed run and trying to get all these cards. And I mean, I guess he's making Arthur doing the lung cancer speed run as well because he's trying to get all the cards as well. But I don't know. He's just a really funny guy, and the fact that he's smoking all these packs a day just puts him a little bit higher than some of these other guys. So I think he also has to go into B tier. In 46th place, about Jeremy Gill. I actually really like Jeremy Gill as a character. Again, he is a little bit too dedicated to his craft in terms of like fishing and all that. He's just like way into it, like way too much into it. But I don't know. I still like him as a character. He's definitely nothing like super special. Like, I don't know. He's cool and all, but he's not like the craziest, coolest character that's ever come alive. But I don't know. I really like him, and the fact that he and Arthur or John can eventually go and, you know, catch the legendary catfish. I feel like that is really fun in its own right. So he also gets to go into B tier. In 45th place, we got Edmund Lowry Jr. This guy is just such a crazy guy. I mean, of course, being a serial killer kind of makes you like a sociopath in your own way, but this guy's just like tapped into it. And I don't know. I really think he's an interesting character, but at the same time, this mission is a little weird. And while there is some nice characterization here, like you can read a lot of the stuff about him. He's like talking to his mom, and you can see like there's a bunch of newspaper articles on like the secret serial killer and like how he's like trying to always get recognized, and like no one recognizes him until now. But I don't know. I really just like him as a character, and there's some very, very solid characterization from just like going around the map, even though you don't really get to interact with his character all that much. So I think Edmund Lowry Jr. also has to go into B tier. In 44th place, I've got Black Belle. I actually really like her as a character. She's only in like the one side mission, and she's only in like one part of the mission, but I still think she is a really cool character, and just in general, she kind of is like one of these badass women, kind of like Sadie Adler. So I don't know. I really like her as a character, and while she isn't like all that amazing, you don't really get that much characterization from her. She definitely is probably better than a lot of these other people from this same like noblest of men and a woman, because she's like one you actually get to interact with and like spend a little bit of time with. So she also gets to go into B tier. In 43rd place, I've got Jim Boy Calloway. I feel like Jim Boy Calloway is just a really interesting character. He's just so set on killing Slim Grant his like whole life, and he just wants to play up this gangster stereotype, even if he's never was really like that. So I don't know. It's a really interesting character where he's kind of drunk himself away because he's gained this really big legend, even if he was kind of the scaredy cat of the group the entire time. And then he kind of grows the same legend because Theodore Levin eventually writes about him and writes this book about him, which I think is just really interesting. You see how kind of the legend of these Wild West people grew, even if they weren't really that interesting in their own right during their actual lives. So I think he also has to go into B tier. In 42nd place, I've got Herbert Moon. Herbert Moon has some really interesting like decisions he has to make in Red Dead Redemption 2, where it's like he doesn't ever see his daughter because she married a Jewish man. He's just like a super racist guy who's also dealing with like the strange man. And I think just all that in general is pretty interesting in its own right. Like if you dig deep in like the strange man lore, Herbert Moon's really involved in that, but he's also just like this super racist guy that like I feel like no one really should like in Red Dead Redemption 2, but there is a lot of interesting lore going on, so I think I also have to put him into B tier. In 41st place, I've got Tommy from this first mission here, and it's really fun to beat up Tommy, and especially when you get to go see him in A Quiet Time as well. I feel like that really like completes Tommy's story arc, where you know get to beat up the guy and then see him in another mission, kind of make amends with him in a way, even if you're super drunk and Tommy is just like an actual vegetable after that. But I don't know, it's just such an interesting character because you can see how just beating the shit out of him really is going to affect him for life, and Arthur basically just like ruin his life forever in this fight here. And I mean, it's kind of on Tommy because he was trying to beat the shit out of Arthur, but at the same time Arthur was just hammering Tommy until basically he would have died if it wasn't for Thomas Downs stepping in. So I think Tommy's a really interesting character, and there's just a lot of deeper lore behind him, so I think he has to go into B tier as well. In 40th place, I've got Thomas. I feel like Thomas is a pretty cool guy, and you definitely get a lot more characterization with him than Jules. And, you know, while he isn't all the most interesting character, he doesn't get that much character development, but he's still this cool guy that kind of helps you out with doing a lot of these other things, like taking out Bronte and all that. And I don't know. I like him as a character, and in the few short missions he's in, he seems like a really cool guy. So I think I also have to put him in B tier. In 39th place, I've got Mr. Black. Basically, Mr. Black and Mr. White are the same. I just think they're both kind of these cool, like, inmate guys. And even though they're, I think, running away from the police for murder, which is a really bad thing, you know, Arthur kind of has to help them out. And they have this really, really nice, like, overall arching arc where they eventually, you know, they like, hate each other, but at the same time, they, like, really love each other. So I think I'll have to put Mr. Black in B tier. And then 38th place, we got Mr. White to round out the whole thing. And again, these guys are just really interesting with each other where, yeah, they have this, like, love-hate dynamic. And I feel like at the end, they're definitely, like, really close to each other. I mean, they, like, live in a house together, but they still have these moments where they kind of hate each other. So, again, Mr. White also gets to go into B tier. In 37th place, we got Thomas Downs. Thomas Downs is a really nice guy. Like, he always wants to help other people. He's out here raising money for people, and he wants to stop Arthur from, like, beating the shit out of Tommy. But he does just kind of get in over his head with, like, the whole loan thing. And, again, he doesn't really provide for his family that well, you know. And then Arthur beats the shit out of him, and it really like completes that whole circle where Arthur becomes like Thomas Downs at the end, where he's a really nice guy trying to help out other people. And I think that's why he has to go into B tier. He kind of changes Arthur into a whole new man. So while he doesn't really have that much in terms of the story, like he's not in the story that much, I think his inclusion in the story really changes Arthur into a good man. In 36th place, about Arturo Bullard. I feel like Arturo is extremely like charismatic in this mission, and I really got to like know him by the end of the mission. And eventually when he does die, I was kind of pissed off at Sadie because, you know, it's same as Arthur. I was getting to like him by the end of the mission, and Sadie just kind of ruins it for me. So I don't know. I was kind of pissed at Sadie at this point, and this is like one of the moments where I was like actually mad at her, because Arturo's a pretty cool guy, and especially in this mission where it's like one of the most unique times, you're kind of just chilling with this guy Arturo, and while I didn't really like him that much at the beginning of the mission, you really get to like him more and more as time goes on, as he kind of gets more and more comfortable with Arthur. So I think he also gets to go into B tier. I just kind of pissed me off that Sadie eventually killed him. In 35th place, I've got Alden. I feel like Alden's a really cool character. I mean, he and Trelawney definitely have something going on. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something going on between them. And I think Alden is just a really interesting guy in general. Like, he's always really nice to Arthur and John. He's always like, oh, it's you again. And then it's like, I don't know, he's just a nice guy in general. It seems like he remembers them every time they come through. And just overall is a really nice guy in general. And, you know, tells them about stagecoaches. I don't know. He's just a great guy, and I think he has to go into B tier. Even though he doesn't have that much like character development, he's just a cool guy in general, and I always love coming back to Rhodes to see him. In 34th place, about Charlotte Balfour. I just think she's a really nice woman, and you know, it seems like her and Arthur really get along well, and I don't know. I really like it, especially with this last moment where they share like a nice kiss. I mean, they're not like, she kisses him on the cheek. It's nothing like especially bad, but I don't know. I feel like they're just a really nice. She's a really nice person, and you know, she really moves on from her husband, similar to how like Sadie moved on from her husband, and she really becomes like this more wild woman than she was before, where she's like this city woman. So there's some nice character development there, and I think she goes into B tier. While she's nothing really that special, there's not like a ton of like camaraderie between the two of them. I think she definitely gets to go into B tier because she's a really cool character. In 33rd place, I've got Captain Monroe. Even though he's not the most interesting character, just the fact that this guy puts his life on the line to try and stop the army from fighting the Native Americans is just an overall just amazing character, and probably one of the most honorable characters in the entire game. He literally does all these things. He still won't fight back against the army. Just has to make me put him up this high. Like, while he isn't that interesting of a character himself, just the fact that he has such strong character morals, and he won't do anything bad against his fellow soldiers, just has to make me put him at least in B tier. In 32nd place, I've got Abigail Roberts. I think she really is just like more focused on, you know, helping Jack grow up and everything, and like trying to make John a good father. And I feel like those are really her core tenets as a character. And, you know, while she doesn't really have that many other facets, especially in like the beginning of the game, while she does get a little bit more like protective of John as the game goes on, I don't know. I feel like she's a really solid character, and the fact that she is like so strong with her morals and everything just has to make me put her up into B tier. She's just a really solid character, and I just really like her as a person. In 31st place, I've got Catherine Braithwaite. Catherine Braithwaite is a pretty solid antagonist, but I don't think she's really anything all that special. She kind of just is this like bad woman who like is pretty smart in her own way. Like, she's always trying to outsmart the Vanderlyn gang, and clearly she did at points, because, you know, both them and the Greys figured out that the Vanderlyn gang kind of turned on them, and she took away Jack, and the Greys eventually shot at them and, you know, eventually killed Sean. But she's not really all that developed as a character. She's just this like bad woman who always like is, you know, supporting the Lemoyne Raiders, used to be a slave owner, and just basically is a bad person like that. But I still think she is a pretty well developed character and has to go into B tier. In 30th place, I've got Uncle. I really like Uncle as a character, but again, in the beginning of the game, he really doesn't get that much character development. He's kind of just this angry guy who always antagonizes everyone, but at the end of the game, he really becomes this like kind of smart guy, even though he's still really, really lazy, but he's like cracking a lot more jokes, and he just becomes like a lot nicer of a character, while he's still pretty much the same Uncle as before. So I feel like the second half of the game, he really, you know, becomes this great character, but the first half of the game, he's kind of just like an average guy. So I think that puts him into B tier. While he is a really solid character at the end of the game, there's just not enough going on with him at the beginning of the game to put him any higher than B tier. In 29th place, about Angelo Bronte. I think Bronte is a really, really solid antagonist in the game, but again, there's not that much development with him. He's just this kind of Italian guy that controls all of Saint Denis. And while I really love the scene where Dutch just throws his head in the water, and I think the scene of attacking basically everything in Saint Denis where that goes on with Bronte is really cool, but I don't think Bronte's all that developed as an antagonist, and he kind of just seems like this guy that wants to pay off people and use his money and wealth and power to just take control over everything. So I think that puts him into B tier. He is this pretty developed character. Like, he does have these really, really strong morals in that way, but he's not that developed in any other way, so he has to go into B tier. In 28th place, about Mary Beth. I think she is a really, really nice character. Like, she's always doing nice things for Arthur, and you always come back to Cam. It's like, oh, Mary Beth's there for a conversation, and you always just like, I don't know, kind of vent. Arthur can kind of vent himself out to Mary Beth. So I think she's a really solid character, but there's nothing like really special going on with her. She's just like a really nice character, and I mean, she's pretty good looking as well. So I feel like that always puts her up a little bit of a bump as well. I don't know. She's just a really nice character, and while she's not really that developed as a character as like all the other women are, she definitely is a little bit, to me, a little bit better of a character than they are, because at least there's like a little bit more compassion and a little bit more development than some of the other ones like Karen and Tilly. In 27th place, about Edith Downs. I really like Edith as a character, and I feel like she really has a really strong character arc when she kind of, goes to prostitution. She basically does anything to provide for her son after Arthur beats the shit out of her husband and kills her husband. But I don't know. I like her as a character, and you really see this, strong character arc and just always trying to provide for her family. And then at the end, she does get her happy ending where she and Archie move away from, I don't know, whatever place they're in before, like Annesburg. And, they get to start their own golf course, which is always pretty fun. So I don't know. I think she's a really solid character, and she really has these strong morals and does all this. So I think she has to go into B tier as well. In 26th place, I've got Albert Mason. I feel like Albert Mason is a really solid character. You really see him and Arthur get some solid camaraderie, but I don't think I can put him any higher than B tier, just because I feel like every single time you do visit him in one of his missions, there's not really that much going on. I feel like the one time you do get the swamp eggs, or like the alligator eggs in the swamp, there's a little bit more going on, and eventually he does realize that maybe he should stop doing photography because it always gets him into more dangerous situations. But I don't know. He's not all that special of a character, and while he and Arthur really do form a nice friendship, I don't think it's anything like better than a lot of these other stranger characters do. So I can only put him in B tier. In 25th place, I've got Trelawney. I really like Trelawney as a character. You see he's kind of this family man, but at the same time, he really wants to dodge his obligations of like being a family man and being in the gang at the same time. And he's like a con artist, and at the same time, he's like never doing anything violent. He's not like hurting other people. He's always just scamming them with his smarts, and he's mostly aiming towards rich people. So I feel like that has to put him, a little higher than some of these other characters. I feel like he's also just a really funny guy. Basically, any mission he's in is like really, really solid to me. So I think I also have to put him into B tier. Just anytime Trelawney's in the gang, it's a fun time. In 24th place, I got Sean McGuire. I really love Sean as a character, one of the most charismatic people in the entire game. And while he only has like a chapter basically of time in the game, I just think he always steals the show in whatever scene he's in, because he's just one of the most charismatic guys, one of the funniest guys, and just, I don't know, it's just a great character. I really love him, and I think he really reminds Arthur of like himself at a younger age. So I don't know, I just really love Sean as a character, and it sucks that he died so early, because the time with Sean in the game is probably one of the most fun times when you're just kind of carefree and chilling, and I feel like any time you're with Sean, he's just this really cool guy. I just love him whenever he's in the game, so I think he has to go into B tier. In 23rd place, I've got Lenny Summers. I really love Lenny as a character, but again, I feel like he doesn't have the same character development as like any of the people in the A tier, so I think he can only go in B tier, but he's still a really great character. I just think anytime he's in the game, like there's always like a fun moment with him, like from A Quiet Time to the Battle at Shady Belle, and like eventually when you do see him die, it's just such a big shock, and I think that has to be one of the saddest moments in the entire game, because it's just, I don't know, it just makes me so sad, because Lenny is a character that I never expected to die, at least in this way. So when he eventually does die, it just becomes such a big shock to you. But I think him as a character can only go in B tier just because there's not that much character development from him. In 22nd place, I've got Charles Chatanet. I really love every mission this guy's in. He's just such an interesting guy, and just him being French and all, just really, I don't know, it kind of spices up the whole game because he speaks with a French accent, and he just really is an eccentric guy. And I don't know, I just love this guy, and whatever mission he's in, he always just spices it up and turns it from like a regular mission into something really interesting. Especially the last one where he's a woman and he's like trying to hide from all the creditors, or I don't know, just every mission this guy's in, just he spices it up, and I just love him so much as a character. While there's not a ton of character development, he's kind of the same guy as before. He's just such a fun character that he has to go into A tier. In 21st place, I got Marco Dragic's robot, and this is just such a sad story where he's on the cliff and he's like, Papa, Papa, and then he eventually does kill Marco. I mean, we don't really know exactly how that happened, but the fact that he does kill Marco and he killed his creator just really reminds me of something like Frankenstein and Nikola Tesla. It's just kind of all in the same genre, and I don't know, I really love this one, and I think the robot has a lot of really good characterization for something that literally isn't even real. And I think that has to put him in at least A tier just because he's so well characterized for something that's not even real. In 20th place, it has to be Marco Dragic. I love this guy as a character, and I feel like he and Arthur, or he and John, really get a nice camaraderie the entire time. They really build a solid friendship, and the fact that this guy is so hyped when the robot actually lives and then eventually has to get killed by the same thing just makes it so sad. And just this whole stranger mission is one of my favorites in the entire game, and it's so sad when you see his dead body on the floor and then have to go and find the robot. And I don't know, he's based on Nikola Tesla, but I feel like he just blows him out of the water. And just if you get the nice music going at this time, it's just one of the greatest in the entire game's missions. I feel like it's just amazing, and it really just shows how cool of a character Marco Dragic is as a whole. So I think he definitely has to go into A tier. In 19th place, I got Francis Sinclair. Francis Sinclair doesn't really have that much going on with him, but just the fact that like he connects to the Epsilon cult in Grand Theft Auto, and the fact that, you know, you see him as this time traveler at the end of the game. I don't know, it's so crazy to me that he has to go in A tier. There's just so much deep lore going on with this guy, and I don't know, I think that has to put him at least in A tier, even though there's not much character development. Just the fact that he's such a random character and still has all this deep lore going behind him makes me put him in A tier no matter what. In 18th place, I've got Evelyn Miller. I love this guy as a character. You see how much his writings influence people like Dutch, and you know, eventually when John gets to talk to him, I don't know, it kind of makes me sad that like Dutch was the one who told John about, and John and Arthur about Evelyn Miller, and eventually they're the ones that get to talk to him a little more, and John's the one who actually eventually gets to kill Dutch and also basically kills Evelyn Miller in like an indirect way. I don't know, it's great in its own way, and I just think the whole Evelyn Miller mission, Evelyn Miller's a really interesting guy, and just the callbacks to real life here, like the real life references with Evelyn Miller, just shows that he's a great character, and I think he definitely has to go into A tier. There's just so much impact from just this one guy on the entire game. In 17th place, it's Mr. Wayne. This guy's death could be the most shocking out of anyone's death in all of Red Dead Redemption 2. When this guy gets shot up after he's just chatting your ear off the entire time, it's just so crazy. And when he's killed by the Skinners in just such a brutal way, it's just, I don't know, it just caught me off guard so much. And I think he's just such an interesting guy in his own way. Like, he's like, oh my God, I'm a hired gun, I can do all this. And he just takes the arrow and he just sits down, and he doesn't actually try and fight back at all. So I don't know, I really like him as a character. I think they did some really good characterization for someone who's only in the game for like half a mission. So I think he also has to go into A tier. Just the short time he's in the game, he makes such a big impact. In 16th place, I've got Blind Man Cassidy. I love this guy as a character, and the fact that just everything he says is just like foreshadowing about, you know, Arthur and John's life. It shows that, I don't know, it's just like Rockstar kind of talk to you through the fourth wall. I don't know, I really like it, and the fact that you can just see him all over the entire map just makes him such a better character, because he just, same thing with William, he can kind of just show up anywhere and tell you a fortune or like foreshadow something about the game. So I think he also has to go into A tier. In 15th place, I've got Jeremiah Compson. I really love the characterization they do with him, and I think he's probably the best like stranger mission character in terms of characterization. You see this guy who has had his entire life basically taken away from him by the Union because he was a slave catcher before, and I don't know. He just is holding on to that and clinging on to that, and basically putting a bullet in his head saves him from, thinking about that old life. So I don't know. It's a great story in general, and I think Jeremiah Compson is one of the more fleshed out characters while only being in like 2 stranger missions here. So I think he also has to go into A tier. Just putting a bullet in his head really ends him of all the misery he's had, because he's just hating the life he lives now. In 14th place, I've got Colm O'Driscoll. I really like Colm as a character, and I feel like it just shows like what Dutch could be if he was even worse as a character. I think there is some solid, learning about Colm. Like, he's just this really, really bad guy that's running the gang who doesn't care about any of the lives that he loses, and he and Dutch kind of have this feud that doesn't really matter at this point. It's been like over 20 years, and they're still fighting over things that happened in their like early 20s at this point. So I don't know. I think it's just such a weird feud between the two of them, and it shows that Dutch could have been a lot worse. And even if he is technically like a bad guy in the game, he could have been Colm and just not cared about anyone's life. But instead, he wanted to live this cult leader life and actually care about them, but at the same time, just care about himself most of all. In 13th place, I've got Agent Milton. I really like Agent Milton as a character. It kind of shows this guy that kind of bends the law and breaks laws and just kind of pushes it as far as he can while still being within the law, because he's a member of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Like, he kidnaps Abigail, he does all these things, and while they're technically fine within the law, especially like killing Hosea, like all the members of the Vanderlyn gang are wanted dead or alive. They're not like the greatest things to do, and I feel like the Pinkerton Detective Agency just pushes the law as far as they can without like really breaking it. And while he is this like very, very cunning guy, he really passes on some of these more interesting techniques down to Ross, who just twists them and turns them into the worst things possible in Red Dead Redemption 1. So I really love that part. I just think him and Arthur and their kind of feud between each other really just shows up well, and I think Milton has to be an A-tier character. I just love how they characterize him in Red Dead Redemption 2. In 12th place, I've got Sister Calderon. I really love her as a character. She shows Arthur just all the nice things and all the honorable things he can do, and like for the short time in his life he has left, she kind of puts him on a path to salvation instead of, living in hell. So, I don't know. I really like that part, and I think also Sister Calderon just is a really nice character in general. You can see her in Red Dead Redemption 1 and Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare, and she kind of is just like the same really, really honorable person and really, really nice person. I think this like talk right here and some of the other stuff that goes on in chapter 6 with Sister Calderon really just changes Arthur into being a man who wants to save John in that last mission. So I think that has to put her at least into A tier. In 11th place, about Hosea Matthews. I really like him. He's a strong father figure type character to both Dutch and Arthur. And I just think he has a really solid, way of looking at things. He always wants to do things, maybe not the most, violent ways, but he always tries to like scams people in the same way. And I don't know, I feel like he just has a really wise outlook on life and is always trying to do the right thing for the gang, because he's always trying to, help everyone out, especially before he dies, because he knows he only has a short time left living. So I think Hosea is just a really well-developed character and also has to go into A tier. In 10th place, I've got Leviticus Cornwall, one of the best antagonists in the entire Red Dead Redemption series, and I feel like just him being this overall representation of evil throughout the entire game. And at the end of the game, you just see him come out and Dutch just puts a hole in his chest immediately. Just shows how quick like lives can end, and shows like the bad things that the Vanderlyn gang is doing in general. And while, of course Cornwall's doing a lot worse things, they are just taking from, people that are also bad people as well. But the Vanderlyn gang is also murdering people and taking people's lives and doing all this other stuff. And they're also doing bad things at the same time. And it's like this becomes such an unsatisfying death because Dutch does it in such a bad way. So it makes Cornwall's character even better. He kind of seems like this martyr and the perfect way to like take down the Dutch Vanderlyn gang. And that's probably what also leads to like John and Dutch's death later down the line, just because Cornwall is this really rich and powerful guy, and I'm assuming his children would want to hunt down the Vanderlyn gang no matter what it takes. So I think Cornwall definitely has to go into A tier. I just love his character and how well fleshed out he is. In 9th place, I've got Eagle Flies. I really like Eagle Flies as a character. I think they do a really solid thing, showing that he just wants to fight back against the people who have basically oppressed his people for a super long time. So I think that's really well fleshed out, but he does kind of come off as a brat sometimes, and I don't think he's the most the nicest guy. Like, he always just kind of does things against his father. He's kind of this rebellious teenager who always wants to do these things that are bigger and better and wants to fight back against the status quo instead of just following in his father's footsteps and being kind of this beta versus the actual alpha that Eagle Flies is. I don't know. I really like him as a character, and I just like how charismatic he is. At the same time, that does kind of turn him into Dutch's prime target, where he just easily gets turned by Dutch into this person that Dutch can use for his own like plans. So I don't know. I really like him, and I think he definitely has to go into A tier. In 8th place, I've got Micah Bell. Micah is just one of the greatest antagonists in the entire game, and I feel like he comes off as this guy that is like an antagonistic force, but not like the real antagonist of the game. But then you see that he, has turned Dutch into this guy who doesn't really care about the whole gang. He just cares about himself. He thinks everyone is selfish for leaving the gang, and he really plays into the cult of Dutch Vanderlyn and everything like that. And I don't know. I just love Micah as a character, and I feel like he really just works to turn Dutch into this different guy than he was at the beginning of the game, and just like a little bit get into his mind, get into that midlife crisis that Dutch is having, and just twist him a little bit there. So while Micah isn't like the nicest character at all, he's definitely one of the meanest, and he's not a very likable character. He still is a great character and has some nice development, even though people say he's super one-sided. You can see how he's this like mechanical guy who's always trying to twist people and manipulate people into doing exactly what he wants, and he eventually does get that, and that's why he has to be an A tier character. In 7th place, we got Sadie Adler. I think Sadie's a great character as well. You see her turn in from this, regular woman wife, and then she, becomes a part of the gang, and she's kind of just really sad because Jake died, and she, tries to do stuff with Pearson and all that, and then she eventually becomes a gunslinger like all the other men in the gang, and, really takes on that whole role that I guess she was kind of, doing before with her husband. But she really turns on this, gunslinger role, and she just goes out for revenge. I just love her as a character because she's just so nasty about dishing out the revenge to O'Driscolls and just doing everything and just making their lives as bad as possible. Like, all these O'Driscolls that might not even have been involved with, she's like, fuck it, we're going to murder every single O'Driscoll at Hanging Dog Ranch just because I can and just because, I want to get that little bit of revenge. So, I don't know. I really like that part. I think she definitely has to go as an A tier character. In 6th place, I've got Charles Smith. I love Charles as a character. Very, very strong morals and just one of the nicest characters in the entire game. Basically, he always wants to have everyone's back and always just wants to help people. And I just love him in that way. And I just think, I don't know, he's just one of my favorite characters. He really just is a really amazing person the entire game. And he always just wants to protect people that really can't have the same protection. Like, he's protecting animals and he's protecting people from, Micah, in this video. So, I don't know. I just love him as a character, and he's always nice with both Arthur and John and Sadie and Abigail. And he's just trying to help people the entire game. So I just love him as a character, and he definitely has to go into A tier just because he's the nicest character in the entire game. In 5th place, I've got Hamish. Hamish just is the peak of the Stranger missions. He and Arthur just have such a nice, friendly ability between the two of them. And then when you eventually do see Hamish die at the end, it's just so sad. I don't know. I love Hamish as a character, and I think he has to be one of the cooler characters in the entire game. I don't know. I really like him, and I think he shows exactly why Red Dead Redemption 2 is so good, because this is a mission where you wouldn't expect it to be that good, but you just see this friendship and brotherhood and bromance build between Hamish and Arthur, and just so beautiful to see. And even when you see John do it, it's when he comes back after Arthur's death, it's just so sad to see that Hamish really misses Arthur, and John also really misses Arthur, and they're both in the same wavelength. So Hamish has to be S tier. He's the best Red Dead Redemption 2 Stranger Mission character for sure. In 4th place, it's Rains Falls. I, again, love him as a character, and I think he changes Arthur the most. He's like, Arthur, you only have a certain amount of time left. You have to do the best for people, and I think that's why Arthur really becomes the great person he is in Chapter 6, especially if you're playing on High Honor. He always wants to help people and save people, and doing this thing for Rains Fall and just being a super nice guy here really shows why Arthur becomes that nice guy as well in the 6th chapter. So he just really changes Arthur's perspective on everything, and he really is like, oh, wow, I have to actually save people instead of trying to hurt people. and he tries to get these people away from Dutch. And I feel like Rain's Fall also shows him a different side of Dutch, where he really sees what Dutch is trying to do now and sees that Dutch is like what Dutch is trying to do, and Dutch's plans are not the same as Arthur's and John's plans. And he tries to help those people that aren't following Dutch's plans as well. So I think Rain's Fall has to go in S tier. He's just such a great character. In third place, it's John Marston. I love John as a character, and you really see his development over the entire game, where he eventually becomes a pretty solid father to Jack. He rekindles his relationship with Arthur, and he becomes a good, pretty solid husband to Abigail. He's not a great husband during American Venom, as he goes basically directly against her wishes, but at the same time, he does a lot of good things by the end of the game. And I think he just turns from this kind of outlaw into an actual someone to be proud of. Like, I'd be like, oh, this is my dad. This is someone I'm proud of. And I mean, in a way, like, of course, Jack would have rather had his dad be an outlaw, but still, either way, John has some really nice character development, and you see him just turn from this guy who's pretty like narcissistic and just angry at the world into someone who's kind of like taking the love for what he has. I don't know. I feel like that's just some really great character development on Rockstar's part. It just shows that Arthur and the teachings he's learned from like Rain's Fall and Sister Calderon kind of all passed down to John in a way. Like, while he didn't fully pass down, he definitely got a lot of the main points of those things. So I think he did become a better person by the end of the game. I think that's why he has to go into S tier, just because there's such great character development from him. In second place, it has to be Dutch Van der Linde. Dutch is just one of the greatest characters in the entire game, and I feel like he'd be the greatest character in so many video game franchises if it wasn't for the #1 guy, and he's just such a charismatic leader. You see him like really running this cult of personality in the Van der Linde gang, where everyone kind of has to follow him, and he just does all these things to keep up that same cult, and everyone follows him in that same way. I just think it's so great because you can see exactly what Dutch does to, keep up everyone following him, and he just, I don't know, he's just such a great character. And I feel like the fact that eventually he does, like, that becomes his downfall just shows how good of a character and the way he's written. Because even in Red Dead Redemption 1, you see like his anti-establishment views, but in Red Dead Redemption 2, you really get to see those anti-establishment views, because he will never go against Milton, and he's attacking Cornwall, even if he knows it's one of the most dangerous things he can do, just because he's anti-establishment, he's anti-capitalism, and he just wants to take down exactly what Cornwall and Milton stand for. So I don't know, he's just such a great character, and the way they wrote him just has to put him into S tier no matter what, because he's just written so amazingly. In first place, it has to be Arthur Morgan. Just being the protagonist of the game does give him a little step over everyone, but just the fact that he has such great character development from being this outlaw and this like actually bad person to turning into someone who has like a lot of honor and is just trying to save every single person he loves. It just is such a great character development. I just think overall, just playing as this guy and turning him from this person that's, not the most honorable guy into someone who you could be like, oh, this is a guy that I would want as my father, as my son, as my brother, just because he's such a great character by the end of the game and is trying to help every single person he can. Has to put him as one of the greatest character developments and one of the greatest character arcs in any game ever. So Arthur Morgan has to be the best character in Red Dead Redemption 2 and has to be one of the best characters in any video game ever, and so has to get into the S tier. And that wraps up my entire Red Dead Redemption 2, ranking basically every character in the entire game. Of course, I did miss a couple characters that said some things, but these are basically everyone off the top of the head. If you told me their name, if you kind of told me who they were, I'd know exactly who they were immediately from that. So if you do want to see more videos like that, I'm going to be posting a lot more tier lists like this, and I might be going into some other content like GTA or Red Dead Redemption 1.